The evening air carried a gentle coolness, the kind that made people want to walk slowly and enjoy the city lights. Restaurants along the street were buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm hum of conversation. Among them stood a well-known upscale restaurant, a place famous for its fine dishes and polished service. The doors opened often that night, letting in well-dressed guests who were greeted with smiles and escorted to their tables with care. An elderly woman slowly walked toward the entrance. Her steps were steady, though age had slightly bent her back. Her hands carried a small purse and her eyes carried both wisdom and warmth. She wasn't dressed in designer clothes, but her outfit was neat, her shoes polished and her presence calm and dignified. She had come to enjoy dinner, something she didn't often do outside her home. For her, this evening was special. The host by the door greeted her politely and gestured toward the dining area. She thanked him softly and began making her way inside. The restaurant smelled of roasted meats, herbs, and freshly baked bread. Light jazz music floated through the air, blending perfectly with the sound of quiet conversations and the soft clinking of cutlery. She approached a table that seemed open, but before she could sit down, a young waiter stepped in front of her. His smile was thin, not the kind of smile that welcomed, but one that carried judgment. "Excuse me," he said, holding out his hand slightly as if blocking her way. "This section is reserved." The woman looked around. The table had no sign on it, no indication of being reserved. She adjusted her purse and said kindly, "That's all right. I don't mind waiting until you find me a table." The waiter hesitated, then gave a short laugh, though it wasn't friendly. "Actually, I don't think this is the right place for you. There are other restaurants around that might be more suitable." His tone carried a weight not just of refusal but of dismissal. It wasn't about the table being reserved. It was about her. He looked her up and down, from her simple shoes to her modest coat, and made a silent judgment. The woman's heart sank for a moment, but she didn't let it show. She had lived long enough to recognize the look in his eyes, the kind that measured people not by their worth but by their appearance. She had felt it before, though less often these days, and it still stung the same way. "I would just like to have dinner," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but her words carried dignity. "Can you please check if there's a table?" The waiter's smile vanished. His face hardened and he shook his head. "Ma'am, this restaurant is exclusive. You understand? It's not just about food, it's about the experience. I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else." Several people seated nearby overheard the exchange. Some lowered their eyes, pretending not to notice. Others shifted in their chairs, uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. It was easier to stay silent than to stand up. The woman's fingers tightened on her purse strap. She wasn't angry, but she felt a deep sadness. She wondered how many times this waiter had spoken to others in the same way, and how many had walked away quietly. She thought of the meals she had prepared in her own kitchen for her children, meals filled with care and love, meals that brought people together. And here she was being told she didn't belong, as though food and dignity had a price tag that excluded her. Still, she chose patience. "Young man," she said gently, "I have come to eat here tonight. I believe I can pay for my meal. I don't wish to cause trouble." But the waiter didn't soften. If anything, he grew more arrogant, folding his arms and tilting his chin slightly. "Ma'am, it's not about money. Our guests are a certain type. I'm sure you'd feel out of place here." The words struck like cold water. A flush of humiliation crept into her cheeks, but she remained steady. She had always taught her children that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you gave it away. Tonight she reminded herself of that truth. For a moment she considered leaving. It would be easier, less painful to walk out and find another place to eat. But a small part of her refused to move. Why should she leave? Why should she accept this treatment quietly? As she stood there undecided, the doors opened again. A tall man in his 40s stepped in, his presence confident but not loud. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. His face lit up instantly and he hurried over. "Mother," he said warmly, his voice carrying love and respect. "I'm sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible." Her face softened at once. The sadness in her eyes faded as she saw him. She reached out, touching his arm gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." The waiter, still standing nearby, raised his eyebrows. His expression shifted from irritation to slight discomfort. He hadn't expected her to have company, let alone someone who carried himself with such authority. The son glanced at his mother, then at the waiter, sensing tension in the air. His eyes narrowed slightly, though his voice remained calm. "Is there a problem here?" The waiter forced a laugh, trying to mask his unease. No problem. I was just explaining that the restaurant is very busy tonight. Not many tables left." The mother said nothing, but the look she gave her son told him everything. He turned back to the waiter, his jaw tightening. He wasn't quick to anger, but he didn't take disrespect lightly, especially when it involved his mother. For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and heavy. The background music continued. Plates clinked and people whispered, but the air around them felt different, charged. The waiter shifted on his feet, suddenly less confident than he had been just minutes earlier. The son looked at him firmly and said, "Do you know who she is?" The waiter blinked, caught off guard by the question. He gave a short chuckle, but it lacked the arrogance of before. "She's your mother?" he said, trying to sound casual. The son's eyes didn't leave his. His voice lowered, steady and serious. "Yes, she is my mother, and you have no idea what you've just done." The waiter's face paled slightly, but before he could respond, the mother placed a hand on her son's arm. "Let it be," she whispered. "We came here for dinner, not for a scene." But her son only shook his head gently. "No, mother. Respect matters. And tonight he will learn that." The waiter swallowed hard. He had no idea that the woman he had so casually dismissed carried a truth that would leave him frozen. A truth that would soon turn this quiet restaurant into the stage of a powerful lesson. And so, the evening that had begun with a simple plan for dinner was about to unfold into something far greater, an encounter that none in that restaurant would forget. The son stood beside his mother, his hand lightly resting on her arm. He could see the quiet sadness in her eyes. Even though she was trying her best to keep her calm, she wasn't the kind of woman who argued or raised her voice. She had always believed that silence could speak louder than anger. But tonight, her silence carried the weight of being pushed aside, of being treated as though she did not belong. The waiter shifted uncomfortably, still holding on to his earlier excuse. He crossed his arms as if to protect himself, his tone carrying less confidence than before. "Like I said," he muttered, "we're very full tonight. I don't think we'll have space." The son looked around. His eyes scanned the restaurant, noting several empty tables spread across the room. A couple near the window had just left, and the staff hadn't even cleared their plates yet. He also noticed a large table in the corner with only 2 guests seated, clearly waiting for more. It wasn't true that the place was completely full, and the waiter knew it too. "Really?" the son said slowly, his voice calm but cutting through the waiter's words. "I see more than a few tables open." The waiter's eyes flickered nervously to the empty spots, then back to the son. He forced another smile, the kind that wasn't genuine. "Those are reserved," he said quickly. "We can't just seat anyone there." The mother gently tugged at her son's sleeve. "Let it go," she whispered. "We don't need to stay here. We can find somewhere else," but he shook his head. His eyes never left the waiter. "No, mother. You deserve to eat here as much as anyone else. No one has the right to tell you otherwise." The waiter gave a little laugh, though his voice was thinner now. "Sir, you don't understand. This restaurant is known for its standards. We try to keep a certain kind of atmosphere. We want the right kind of customers." The son raised his eyebrows. "And my mother isn't the right kind?" The room grew a little quieter. People were starting to notice the tension. A couple at the next table shifted uneasily, pretending to read their menus while listening closely. A man in a suit sipped his wine slowly, his eyes darting toward the scene as though watching a play unfold. The mother stood silently, her hands folded in front of her. She looked small in that moment, not because of her age, but because of the way she was being treated. Still, there was strength in her posture, the quiet strength of someone who had lived through far worse and refused to let this moment break her spirit. The son leaned slightly closer to the waiter, his voice steady. "Do you realize how disrespectful you're being?" The waiter's smile faded. He tried to stand tall, but the weight of the son's stare made him uneasy. "I'm just following rules," he said defensively. "We can't just let anyone sit wherever they want." "Anyone?" the son repeated. His tone carried sharpness now, though his voice was still calm. "That's your explanation? My mother is not anyone. She is a guest who came here to have a meal. And instead of treating her with respect, you turned her away as if she didn't matter." The waiter opened his mouth to respond but closed it again. For the first time that evening, his arrogance cracked, and a flicker of doubt crossed his face. The mother placed a hand gently on her son's arm. "Please," she said softly, almost pleading, "don't make this into something bigger. I don't want a scene." But her son shook his head again. His voice softened when he spoke to her. "Mother, this isn't just about tonight. How many people do you think he's treated this way before? How many more will he treat like this if no one stands up to him? You may want to walk away quietly, but I can't. I won't let anyone disrespect you." The waiter swallowed hard. He tried to stand firm, but the growing attention from nearby tables made him restless. He tugged at his collar, his confidence slipping away bit by bit. Finally, he muttered, "Sir, with all due respect, this restaurant has an image. Some people just don't fit that image." "That's all I meant." The son's eyes narrowed. "So my mother doesn't fit your image?" The waiter hesitated, realizing the weight of his own words. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly, but his voice betrayed him. He had meant exactly that. The silence that followed was louder than any noise could have been. The mother's eyes dropped to the floor, her lips pressed together. The son clenched his jaw, fighting to stay composed. The people nearby shifted again, some whispering, some simply staring. The air was heavy with discomfort, and yet no one stepped in. The son finally broke the silence. His voice was low, but every word carried power. "You should be ashamed. You have no idea who you're talking to. No idea what kind of person she is. You've judged her by her clothes, her age, her face, but you don't know her story. You don't know what she's done or who she is." The waiter blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean?" he asked, though his voice lacked the arrogance he had shown earlier. "You'll find out soon enough," the son said firmly. "But tonight you'll learn that respect doesn't come with a price tag. You don't decide who belongs here and who doesn't. That's not your right." The waiter's throat tightened. He could feel eyes on him from every corner of the restaurant. His earlier confidence had completely drained away, replaced with the uneasy awareness that he might have made a terrible mistake. The mother touched her son's hand again. "Let's sit down," she said softly. "Please, I don't want this to ruin our evening." Her son turned to her, his expression softening instantly. "Mother, you've done nothing wrong. You deserve to be treated with kindness. If anyone has ruined this evening, it isn't you." The waiter cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Look," he said quickly, I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can find a small table in the back." But the son shook his head slowly. His eyes locked on the waiter's, and his voice was calm but firm. "No, you don't offer my mother the back. You don't hide her away like an inconvenience. She will sit in this restaurant with the same respect you give every other guest, nothing less." The waiter froze, his mouth opening and closing as if words had abandoned him. The truth of the son's words weighed heavily on him. He had judged too quickly, spoken too carelessly, and now he stood exposed in front of everyone. The mother, graceful even in the face of insult, simply stood quietly, her strength shining through her silence. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to prove herself. She knew her worth. The son, however, wasn't finished. His voice grew softer now, almost like a whisper, but it carried through the room with ease. "You think she doesn't belong here, but one day you'll understand exactly who she is, and when you do, you'll regret every word you said tonight." The waiter's face turned pale. He didn't understand yet, but the unease in his stomach told him that the truth, whatever it was, would not be in his favor. The restaurant had fallen quiet, the background music now the only sound filling the room. Guests glanced at each other, some with sympathy, some with discomfort, but no one dared to interrupt. The mother took a slow breath, her calm presence a sharp contrast to the tension in the room. Her son stood tall beside her, unshaken, his eyes never leaving the waiter. And in that silence, the story was only beginning. The tension in the air was thick enough to silence even the faint sound of jazz playing in the background. Guests who had been laughing moments earlier were now whispering in hushed tones, their eyes drawn toward the quiet but powerful standoff. The elderly woman stood with calm dignity, while her son remained firmly by her side, his gaze locked on the waiter who had dared to turn them away. The waiter shifted uncomfortably. His once confident stance now looked awkward, his feet slightly apart, his hands restless. He hadn't expected this evening to turn into a test of his own behavior, and certainly not in front of a room full of watching guests. The son's voice broke the silence. It was not loud, but it carried a strength that filled the space. Do you know who she is? The question hung in the air, simple yet heavy. The waiter blinked, caught off guard. He gave a nervous little chuckle, the kind that tried to hide discomfort. Well, I know she's your mother, he replied, his tone half joking but lacking confidence. The son didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even blink. His stare was steady, as if he was waiting for the waiter to understand something far deeper than the words themselves. She is my mother, he said firmly. But she is more than that. She is someone who deserves more respect than you can imagine. The mother touched her son's sleeve gently, trying to ease the rising tension. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. Please, let's not make this worse. We came here for dinner, not to fight. But the son shook his head slowly. Mother, this is not a fight. This is about respect. And sometimes people need to be reminded what respect truly means. The waiter shifted again, his face growing warmer under the stares of the other diners. He cleared his throat and forced another smile. Sir, I don't mean any disrespect. We have standards here. It's about keeping the atmosphere right. The son's eyes narrowed slightly. The atmosphere? You think respect ruins the atmosphere? You think dignity has no place here? The words hit hard, and the waiter had no answer. He looked around as if hoping someone would come to his rescue, but the manager hadn't noticed yet. All eyes were still on him. The mother, still calm, looked around the restaurant herself. She noticed how some guests quickly looked away when her eyes met theirs, embarrassed by what they had overheard. Others gave her small, sympathetic smiles, but no one said a word aloud. She wondered how often this same silence had allowed unfairness to continue. The son took a step closer to the waiter, though his tone remained steady. Let me tell you something. My mother has lived a life full of challenges. She has worked harder than you can imagine. She has given more to this community than you'll ever know. And here you are, judging her as if she doesn't deserve to sit in this restaurant. Do you realize how wrong you are? The waiter opened his mouth, but no sound came. His earlier arrogance had completely dissolved, leaving only uncertainty and fear. Do you know how many people she has helped? The son continued, his voice now carrying the rhythm of truth. Do you know the sacrifices she has made? Do you know the lives she has changed, the door she has opened for others? The mother lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the praise. She had never sought recognition. Her life had been about serving quietly, giving without asking for thanks. Yet hearing her son speak with such pride filled her heart in a way words could not capture. The waiter, on the other hand, seemed frozen. He hadn't expected this turn. In his mind, she was just another customer he could brush aside. But now he was being forced to confront the reality that he had misjudged someone important, someone far more significant than he could have imagined. The son's words grew softer, but each one struck deeper. She doesn't need to prove herself to you. You should be grateful to have someone like her step into this restaurant. Instead, you turned her away as if she was unworthy. That says more about you than it does about her. The silence stretched longer this time. The waiter's face turned pale, then flushed. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet the son's eyes. The mother finally spoke, her voice gentle yet steady. Enough, my son. I don't want to embarrass him further. He is young. Perhaps he doesn't know better yet. Her son turned to her, his expression softening. You are too kind, mother. But kindness should not be mistaken for weakness. He must understand the weight of his actions. The waiter finally found his voice, though it trembled. I didn't realize. I didn't mean. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. The son's eyes remained firm. It's not about what you meant. It's about what you did. And tonight, you've shown everyone in this room how quick you are to judge someone without knowing their worth. The weight of the moment pressed down on the waiter. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by the realization that he had crossed a line that could not be erased by excuses. The mother took a deep breath and looked at her son with gentle eyes. "Let us sit," she said softly. "That is all I want, to share a meal with you. Nothing else matters." Her son nodded slowly, but his gaze stayed on the waiter for a moment longer. His silence was louder than words, carrying a message that the young man would not forget. The waiter stepped aside reluctantly, motioning toward an empty table near the center of the room. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the menus. His earlier confidence was gone, replaced by the heavy knowledge that he had insulted someone far beyond his understanding. As the mother and son walked to their table, whispers followed them. Some guests shook their heads at the waiter's behavior. Others looked down at their plates, ashamed they had stayed silent. The entire restaurant had felt the shift in the air. When they sat down, the son helped his mother into her chair with quiet care. She smiled at him gently, her eyes filled with warmth. "Thank you, my child. But remember, respect cannot be forced. It must come from within." He nodded, but his jaw tightened slightly. Then tonight he will learn it the hard way. The waiter stood a few steps away, clutching the menus, his face pale. He knew the evening was far from over. Something in the son's eyes told him that the truth about this woman, this guest he had dismissed, was about to come out. And when it did, his arrogance would crumble completely. The son leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the waiter. His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried across the table. "Soon you will know who she is, and when you do, you'll understand the mistake you made tonight." The waiter swallowed hard, his throat dry. He nodded quickly, though he didn't fully understand yet. A sense of dread grew in his chest. He had a feeling the truth was something far bigger than he was prepared to face. The elderly woman, graceful as ever, simply unfolded her napkin and placed it on her lap. She smiled faintly at her son, her calmness shining like a light in the tense atmosphere. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need an apology shouted across the room. All she wanted was dinner with her child. But the son knew better. He knew the truth about her life, her identity, and her legacy. And he knew that before the night ended, the entire restaurant would know it too. The waiter, standing nearby with trembling hands, could already feel it coming, the moment when everything he thought he knew would be shattered, leaving him frozen in place. And so the story continued, pulling everyone in the restaurant deeper into an evening they would never forget. The restaurant was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The clinking of glasses had slowed. The sound of forks against plates seemed faint, and even the soft music playing in the background felt like it was holding its breath. The elderly woman sat with calm dignity at the table, her hands resting neatly on the edge while her son leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving the waiter standing nervously a few feet away. The waiter still held the menus in his hands, though he gripped them so tightly that his knuckles were white. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a nervous stiffness in his shoulders and a restless shifting of his feet. He had no idea why this simple dinner had turned into a storm, but deep inside he sensed that he had underestimated someone he should never have disrespected. The son finally broke the silence. His voice was low but carried across the room with perfect clarity. "You looked at my mother and decided she didn't belong here. You thought she was beneath this place. Do you know what kind of mistake you've made?" The waiter swallowed, his throat dry. "Sir, the son raised a hand, stopping him. "No excuses. Just listen." Every pair of eyes in the restaurant seemed to be watching now. The guests at the tables nearby leaned ever so slightly forward, pretending to sip their drinks but really hanging on every word. Even the servers at the far end of the room had paused, exchanging quick glances before turning back, pretending to adjust plates and napkins while secretly listening. The mother shifted gently in her chair. "My child, please, let's not make this about me." Her voice was kind, soft as always, but her son shook his head. "No, mother," he said firmly. "It's time people know who you are. Too many times you've walked away quietly. Tonight you won't." The waiter's palms grew sweaty. His gut told him something was coming, something big, but he couldn't stop it. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I didn't mean—" Again the son cut him off. His voice sharpened now. "You didn't mean?" "You looked her in the eyes and refused to seat her. You told her she didn't fit the atmosphere. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice. A choice to judge her without knowing the first thing about her. The waiter's lips parted, but no words came out. The son leaned slightly forward, his tone calmer but stronger. You see an elderly woman with simple clothes and you think you know her story. But let me tell you who she is. The mother closed her eyes briefly as if bracing herself. She had never wanted attention. Her work had always been done quietly behind the scenes. But she also knew her son. When his mind was set, he would not stop. The son began to speak, his words steady, his pride in his mother shining through. This woman sitting here before you has spent her whole life giving to others. While you were worrying about who looks right in this restaurant, she was working to make sure children in this city had schools to learn in. When you were busy judging her shoes, she was building opportunities for people who had none. The waiter's eyes widened slightly. The room grew even quieter. She is one of the most respected voices in this community. The son continued. She has worked with leaders, with families, with people from every walk of life. She has stood in places you will never stand, spoken to people you will never meet. And do you know what else? His voice grew sharper. This restaurant, the one you claim is too exclusive for her, she is one of the people who helped it even exist. The waiter froze, his mouth open. He stared, unsure if he had heard correctly. His lips parted as though to ask a question, but no sound came. The son nodded, confirming it. Yes, my mother is not just a guest here. She is one of the restaurant's key investors. Without her support, without her generosity, you wouldn't even have this job. And yet you had the nerve to tell her she doesn't belong. Gasps rippled through the tables nearby. The couple who had been quietly listening put down their glasses. A woman at another table whispered to her companion, her eyes wide in disbelief. The waiter's face turned pale and his hands trembled so badly that one of the menus slipped slightly from his grip. The mother sat quietly, her expression unchanged. She had never liked these kinds of reveals. She had always believed her work spoke for itself and didn't need to be announced. But tonight her son had chosen otherwise. The manager of the restaurant, who had been alerted by the sudden stillness of the room, hurried over. His eyes darted between the guests, the waiter, and finally the elderly woman at the table. What is happening here? He asked, his voice tight but polite. The son looked directly at him. Ask your waiter. He refused to seat my mother. He told her she didn't belong. He treated her with arrogance and disrespect. And now he knows the truth about who she is. The manager's face drained of color as he turned toward the woman. Recognition flickered instantly in his eyes. His jaw tightened and his voice stammered slightly as he spoke. Ma'am, I had no idea you were here tonight. If I had known, the son interrupted, his tone firm. That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know who she is to treat her with respect. She should be valued as a human being. Not just because of her title, her work, or her investment. But since your staff couldn't give her that, let's make it clear. She is not just another guest. She is a part of this restaurant's very foundation. The waiter looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. His earlier arrogance, his smug words, all of it had turned into silence. He stood frozen, the reality of his mistake washing over him in waves of shame. The manager's jaw clenched. Please forgive this mistake, he said quickly, his voice full of urgency. It will be corrected immediately. I assure you this is not how we operate. The elderly woman finally spoke, her voice calm, steady, and graceful. I don't want punishment. I don't want scenes. I only want respect, not just for me, but for anyone who walks through these doors. Do you understand? Her words carried a gentle power that struck deeper than any anger could have. The manager nodded quickly, his eyes shining with regret. Yes, ma'am, absolutely. The son leaned back, still watching the waiter. Tonight you learned a lesson. You looked at her and thought she was ordinary. But ordinary people, the ones you dismiss, can carry the greatest stories, the greatest power. Remember that before you decide who deserves respect. The waiter's lips trembled. He nodded slowly, unable to speak, his pride completely stripped away. The room remained quiet, but it was no longer the silence of judgment. It was the silence of reflection. The guests who had been watching now saw more than a confrontation. They saw a truth that echoed beyond the walls of the restaurant. The mother placed her hand gently over her son's. That is enough, she whispered. We came here for dinner. Let's eat. And with that, she turned her attention back to the table, unfolding her napkin as if nothing had happened. Her grace was unmatched, her strength unshaken. The son gave her a small smile. He knew the evening wasn't just about dinner anymore. It had become a lesson for everyone present, a reminder that respect should never be measured by appearance, age, or wealth. As for the waiter, he remained frozen, the truth echoing in his mind. He had dismissed a woman who not only deserved respect as a guest, but who had helped create the very place he worked in. It was a mistake he would never forget. And in that moment, the story of one quiet dinner had become something much greater, a moment that no one in that restaurant would walk away from unchanged. The restaurant remained unusually quiet even after the truth had been revealed. People who had been dining only moments before now seemed more thoughtful, their eyes lingering on the elderly woman and her son at the center of the evening's events. The waiter stood frozen, his hand still trembling, his face pale as if he wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. The manager cleared his throat, still flustered. "Ma'am, sir, please allow me to personally take care of your evening. We will make sure everything is perfect for you both." The son gave a polite nod but did not take his eyes off his mother. "The only thing that needs to be perfect tonight," he said softly, "is that she feels welcome. That is all." The mother reached for her glass of water, her movements calm and deliberate. She lifted it gently, took a small sip and placed it back on the table. Her quiet grace was a contrast to the storm that had just passed. She looked at her son with eyes that carried love but also a gentle reminder. "We will eat," she said simply. The manager bowed his head quickly. "Of course. I will send our best staff to serve you." He turned sharply to the waiter. "You step aside. You will not be handling this table tonight." The waiter lowered his head, shame burning in his cheeks. He stepped back, his voice weak. "Yes, sir." Another server approached quickly, her face kind and her hands steady. She placed menus before the mother and son with a genuine smile. "Please take your time. I'll bring some bread and butter while you decide." Her voice was soft, but it carried warmth, the kind of warmth that had been missing earlier. The mother returned her smile and gave a small nod of thanks. She opened the menu slowly, though she didn't really care what she ordered. The food wasn't the point anymore. It was the dignity of being seen, of being treated as she should have been from the beginning. Her son watched her carefully, as though making sure she was truly all right. When he saw the faint smile on her lips, his shoulders relaxed a little. The guests around the room began to return to their own meals, though the atmosphere remained changed. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful. Some stole glances at the elderly woman, their expressions filled with respect now rather than judgment. The bread arrived warm and soft, with butter that melted as soon as it touched the slice. The mother broke off a piece and offered it to her son, just as she had done when he was a boy. He smiled faintly, taking it from her hand, reminded of countless dinners at their own kitchen table. They ordered their meals, the server treating them with attentive kindness. The food arrived beautifully arranged, and though it was delicious, neither of them spoke much about it. Their conversation was instead filled with stories, memories of the past, laughter at small things, gentle reminders of love that had always been there. The waiter who had caused the trouble remained at the edge of the room, unable to meet their eyes. Every now and then he glanced in their direction, the weight of regret pulling his shoulders lower and lower. He thought of the words he had spoken, the arrogance in his tone, and he felt sick. The manager approached the table again, his voice humble. "Ma'am, sir, I cannot apologize enough. Please allow this meal to be on the house. It is the least we can do." The mother looked at him kindly, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she said gently, "but I don't want free food. I only want a place where respect is served as freely as the bread on this table. Promise me that." The manager bowed his head. "You have my word. Things will change here." The son nodded slowly. "See that they do. Respect should not be optional. It should not depend on who walks through your door. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity." The manager's voice trembled as he replied, "Yes, sir. We will make this right." The evening moved on. The mother and son finished their meal, sharing quiet conversation, laughing softly at moments that only they understood. Around them, the restaurant continued, but something was different now. The air seemed lighter, the silence less heavy. When dessert was offered, the mother declined politely, saying she had eaten enough. Instead, she sipped her tea slowly, savoring the warmth. Her son watched her with quiet pride, knowing that tonight had been more than just a dinner. It had been a reminder to everyone present that respect is not a privilege, it is a right. As they stood to leave, the other diners watched. Some nodded respectfully toward the elderly woman, others gave small smiles of admiration. She acknowledged them with a gentle smile in return, her grace never faltering. The waiter, still standing by the wall, finally gathered the courage to step forward. His voice shook as he spoke. "Pam, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I judged without knowing. Please forgive me." The mother looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes held no anger, only wisdom. She spoke softly but clearly. "Young man, forgiveness is easy. But respect is something you must learn to give before it is asked of you. Let tonight be the lesson you never forget." The waiter lowered his head, tears burning his eyes. He nodded quickly, unable to speak. Her son placed a hand on her arm, guiding her gently toward the door. As they walked out, the restaurant seemed to exhale, as though the weight of the evening had finally lifted. Outside, the night air was cool and fresh. The streetlights glowed softly, and the sound of distant laughter drifted from nearby cafes. The mother paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the sky for a moment. Her son turned to her. "Are you all right?" She smiled faintly. "I am fine. I have lived long enough to know that moments like this will always come. What matters is how we respond." He nodded, his eyes filled with admiration. "You always respond with grace," she chuckled softly. "And you, my child, respond with fire. Together, perhaps we balance each other." They began walking slowly down the street, their footsteps steady, their bond unshaken. The night that had begun as a simple dinner had turned into a story neither of them would forget. More importantly, it had become a story that everyone in that restaurant would carry with them. A reminder that behind every face is a life, a story, and a worth that cannot be measured by appearances. For the waiter, the lesson would stay with him forever. He would never again look at a guest and see only the surface. He would remember the elderly woman who carried herself with quiet dignity, the son who spoke with unwavering pride, and the truth that froze him in place, that respect is not about wealth, clothes, or status. It is about recognizing the humanity in every person. And for the mother and her son, the evening ended not with bitterness, but with peace. They had walked into a place where respect had been denied, and walked out having reminded everyone of its value. The city lights glowed around them as they disappeared into the night, side by side. The story of that evening would echo long after, retold not as a tale of conflict, but as a lesson in dignity, respect, and the quiet power of truth.